Everyone, thank you for joining us again for this edition of Al-Qadim, which I think may be the slowest read through that we've done so far, but we're powering through. There's just always a lot to say about each section. Speaking of, we do want to start off with the content warning, and Isa has kindly agreed to dig into that one, please.
So we just want to throw up specific content warnings for topics of Islamophobia, sexism, and honor killings in this section of the book. If that's something you think is going to be particularly difficult for you to deal with, you can take a break and come back. There will be a VOD, so you can catch up later. If you don't feel able to keep up with it live, it's all good. And yeah, don't worry about us because we take care of ourselves as well.
Before every stream, we have a conversation about our safety tools. We'll call for a break about halfway through as well and give everybody a chance to get a breather, get some snacks or some tea or whatever powers you. We're also, this episode, once it's finished streaming, and previous episodes are on our YouTube channel over at, if you just search for Asians Represent, you'll find it. Digging into the introductions, my name is Ammar. My pronouns are he, him. I'm one of the co-hosts of Asians Represent. I'm also one of the cast members in Dungeons and Asians, and we'll dig into this in a moment. But I also was invited to be part of the panel at D&D Celebration when we talked about weaving Asian stories and shared some of our experience here. But Isa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Isa, or Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm a cosplayer and TTRPG streamer and ripper-aparter of Al-Qadim.
Apparently you're taking it to other spaces too. You just keep talking about it. With our next guest, Adam Ali, please.
Hi, my name is Adam Ali, also known as Werewolf Fields on the internet. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a TTRPG streamer, cultural consultant, writer, apparently. I do a lot of things, wear a lot of hats. And yes, I also exist solely to look at this book and cry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Ammar Amaraz. I use they, she pronouns. I'm a writer, game designer, podcaster, streamer. I do too many things. Please save me. But no, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy being here. And being with these people, and also sometimes reading this book. I enjoy talking about this book. In fact, they trapped me in a closet between episodes and then let me out exclusively to read this book. And my evil clone does everything else that I do. So when you think I'm on another stream or doing another podcast, that's my evil clone that they created so they can save me exclusively to read this book.
We can't have you influenced by outsiders.
Yes. Mariam, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mariam. I go with they, them pronouns. I'm here once a month, tearing apart Al-Qadim. In addition, I am a co-caretaker of Utopia, which is a BIM POC channel for BIM POC. In addition, one of my current projects is I am a stretch goal for Thirsty Sword Lesbians that is still on Kickstarter and is now at 77,000 money thing. It's too early in the morning. Yes, dollars.
Dinars.
And also Sarza means a thing I do, which is a South Asian fantasy stuff.
Yeah, which is super, super fun too. I've had the pleasure of playing it and it's super great. Ahmed, please tell us about how awesome you are.
Hi, I'm Ahmed Al-Jabri. I run a community in the Middle East for Arabs playing D&D. I also translate and I do cultural consulting for Middle East and Arab cultures and games, especially fantasy. I also pick up whatever we destroy from these sessions and try to, find the jewels and the gems and put them together, maybe make a crown or a bracelet or something nice out of it.
And I'm definitely keeping a close eye on that particular project, and it seems to be going amusing. I think we'll touch on that in a moment. Just before I forget, we also have Daniel Kwan here, who is, of course, one of the co-hosts and of Asians Represent and is producing this. He might chime in occasionally as the voice of God, which is much appreciated. Thank you.
Hello.
So did you all hear that too? Sounded like my conscience.
Yeah, honestly, I'm fairly certain that wasn't on stream and just inside our head telepathically.
Yeah. He's telepathic.
We are now experiencing a shared delusion.
Unfortunately, we couldn't have every single wonderful person here on the stream when we were invited to be a part of D&D Celebration. You can catch that talk that we did, or sort of the panel we did, on the Dungeons and Dragons YouTube page. If you missed it, you can go back. But I wanted to check in and get what did you think of the panel? I guess for those of us who were there too, and for those of you who got a chance to catch it afterwards. Emmett, do you want to start?
Yeah, it was great. It was an amazing opportunity for all of us, honestly. They have been very courteous with us, and the feedback I got afterwards, because I made a shout out for anyone who actually played the game for Al-Qadim and experienced it. A few people did reach out and gave me some stories, and it shed some light for me, like what did they enjoy the most about the game. It's not about the bad things that we pick up on that they don't even notice. It's the whole experience about the adventure. So that was very interesting for me, and I got a lot of benefit out of it.
Mm-hmm. Anybody, if you caught the panel, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I was watching it live, and it was obviously, like, everything you guys said was amazing. There was never any doubt about that. The thing that really struck me was it was really good to see the chat so engaged with what you guys were saying and really taking it on board. And there were obviously some unfortunate comments in there, but it was like immediately squashed out, and the mods were really supportive. And it was great to see that from the perspective of like feeling trepidatious about what see and stuff like that. But seeing them really like trying to make sure the panel was engaged with in the correct manner, and that the audience was really receptive to it was really brilliant to see.
I watched it with, we had a fun little like Discord watch party over in the Asian Represent Discord, and a bunch of us were watching it together. It was a lot of fun. I wish I could say something more specific, but my memory is awful. I did, though, enjoy how well y'all kept the time slot and kept very on point and organized. A thing we were 100% going to do today when we covered the entire book in one sitting.
Yeah, there was certainly a sense of like being on and like, oh wow, this is a big stage that we're on, which was really cool. And I hope what we did use that opportunity to do is do the shout outs and try to kind of push forward the work that we've been talking about in this, right? We name dropped, I think, a few of the people here. We definitely talked about some of the concepts and things that we've come up with, or some of the things that we've discussed here. We brought up. And for me, you know, the thing that I kind of went back to is I know people who are, you know, people who are just getting into D&D, or people who've been doing it for some time, and who just kind of assume that if you're doing D&D, you have to play white characters. And the shout out at the end to be just like, you know what, just be yourself. You can just be a brown elf. Who says you can't? The fantasy anyway, was my sort of biggest sort of takeaway from that. Being able to deliver that message to that big an audience was definitely, I think that was pretty, that was a great opportunity that way.
I think y'all did an awesome job of like distilling a lot of the concepts we discussed into a digestible 1 hour chunk for both familiar audience members as well as a wide stage of people who probably haven't seen the Agents Read or Critical Reads, and made it accessible. So good job.
Yeah, it seems like it's drawn some new people over to watch the streams and stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, drop a note in the chat if you're coming here because you saw us do that. And I should say that was heavily down to Daniel and Ahmed doing a bunch of the work, collating into a document, and we got a chance to read it. So that was really, really helpful. And before we go too much further into it, I do want to tease, foreshadowing, dun dun dun, that we are going to do an episode of Asians Represent, like the podcast, with all of the folks you see here, and we'll talk about our experience doing the Al-Qadim stream, our sort of takeaways from that, sort of a bit behind the scenes kind of thing too. So watch for that in your sort of main feed. We don't have a clear timeline on it yet, but that I think will be a very interesting one, and I'd love to get everybody's thoughts as a retrospective on all the streams passed so far. I would like to start, as I like to do, a bit of a tradition here, I guess, with with one of the other cast members in Dungeons & Dragons, DM Steve's tweet that he sort of wrote a little while ago. Now he wrote it about Oriental Adventures, but I think you can sub out Al-Qadim in here too. Oriental Adventures is bad. It has a lot of problems and reinforces harmful stereotypes. But just because I can connect the text to real world racism, it doesn't mean that if you enjoy these books, you are a racist. It means you have the capacity to support Asian stories. And that for me really encapsulate my general approach coming at this. I'm coming at this with maximum capital C charity. I did too much philosophy, so I'm kind of trained in that. But I will also be looking at this primarily from the realm of Edward Said's seminal, I should just say Said, anyway. I can just say that. I'm not quite sure what pronunciation he sort of prefers, but I mean, it's Said apparently. Orientalism. Which is a bit of a tome. It's a bit of a thick book, but it's the founding text of post-colonial studies and really kind of informs my approach coming in here. Does anybody else want to jump in with sort of their thoughts on their approach when they're coming at this text?
My approach is acknowledge that it was written during a certain time, but think about the fact that there is no follow-up book thus far, and people are reading it in the present, and it's still available for sale in the present. It's also one of the very few texts that explore the, I struggle with calling it Arabia, because it's not just Arabia. It's a lot of the Islamic world plus some extra all smushed together, but it's the only text that really explores all of that. It's one of the very few in the TTRPG sphere. I was actually, fun fact, if you Google the word Shahir, the first entire 3 pages of Google search is just D&D, which explains just how heavily it does affect culture, whether we realize it or not. Which means my commentary very much may acknowledge the past, but it's really about the present.
Definitely. General approaches? Anybody else?
For me, it's like he said, it's about catching the experiences of people at the time and acknowledge that they enjoy this. And it's not about whatever racist points that we know and we see that they miss out on noticing. It's about having these adventures in a different shoes and a different lifestyle, a different experiences of life, which is the whole premise of role-play games. And for me, I'm trying very hard to find these interesting things they did in this world and revive them properly. Because honestly, they did a lot of good research in this project, and I've been working with a lot of people showing them what they've done, and we're astonished, like, how did they find this piece of information? But still, at the end of the day, with their lack of actual real life experience of how we view things, they missed out on many things, and they failed to represent this properly. So we want to, what I want to is to reshape what they try to do and put it in the right spot.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it's a little bit of a personal thing for me as well, because when I want to see myself in fantasy world, I kind of have 2 options that don't really encompass all of it. I either have Arabian settings, Al-Qadim type settings, which is more Muslim or Arab or like a weird mishmash, or I have Hindu mythology, whereas my personal experience is kind of more enmeshed and more a combination of the two, and many other things that are completely like not even brought up at all. So for me, this is hoping, going through this and sort of like with all the other points that everybody else has said, that when settings are written that are not written by me, it's a little more sensitive.
And you touched on something really, I think, important there too, is, you know, we all love tabletop role-playing games. So we are, of course, looking at this as players. And as we go along, we'll also be like, oh, that's actually kind of an interesting mechanic. Maybe we can actually reclaim that a little bit. And the rest of this is maybe stuff we would never want to touch with a 10-foot pole if we were playing or if we were GMing. And then another perspective that has been really interesting to me around the table is we have a few folks here who have done game design. And so it's always interesting to get that perspective as well on like, oh, that's kind of an odd choice to make. If I was doing it that way, I wouldn't do it that way, and that kind of a thing too. So.
I think for me, like when I'm approaching this, there's two sort of big steps that I try to take to any critical read or analysis of an issue. And it's one is establishing why it's an issue. And sometimes that is laying out very logically why it's a problem, and sometimes that is dunking on it because we just need to get the emotions out there. And sometimes that is completely fine. The second step, once you establish this issue, is working on either laying out a path to a solution or at least stating an example solution. Because we can do the second step. We can read Al-Qadim and go like, oh, purity is problematic. Here's the solution, without doing the first step. But then that problem will be repeated elsewhere. And I think that's a thing I've seen a lot, like coming sort of from a perspective of like seeing game designers and seeing audio fiction creators and the like, who all are aware of problematic content and try to do better, but might not necessarily recognize the root causes of issues or why something is an issue. So they avoid one thing, but don't fix a real identical issue because they never stop to examine why the first one was an issue. And I think that's really why the first part is crucial. But also the second part is crucial because if we just identify, well, here is why it's a problem and don't give people any hope for a solution, it can feel like we're just shutting down ideas when we want people to write and enjoy our stories and feel a place in our stories and be able to like see themselves in our world.
Oh, thank you so much for summing that up really brilliantly. So shall we dig into this section today? Now, we did get into the first paragraph of purity. We're going to sort of read it again just to kind of refresh people's, bring it to the top of your mind again. Who wants to take it away? Adam Ali? Oh, sorry. You can start with the first paragraph, and then we'll just go in order, in sort of clockwise order from Mariam, please.
Sure, I'll jump that bullet.
Ooh.
Yes, I did say it purposefully that way. In the land of fate, purity may be a man or woman's greatest virtue, at least publicly. A foreign Lothario, condemned for his actions, may point to the harem or harem as proof of Zakaran hypocrisy. Oh God, it's really hard reading through this without rolling my eyes so hard. In point of fact, very few Zakaran men have more than one wife. But even the wealthy sheikh with a harem is technically married to every woman whose unveiled face graces his bedchamber. Furthermore, a man and a woman may divorce readily and find new spouses with no stigma attached for anyone. The fact that a sheikh or king is married to a particular woman for only a few weeks or even days implies no impropriety for him or for her. Long or short, a marriage is sacred in the land of fate.
So we already did a commentary on this paragraph.
Hypocrisy.
Yeah.
If you want to see why all of us are just having the reactions we are having right now, go check out the last episode. We could probably do an entire another like 6 episodes on just this paragraph, but
let's power through. Mariam, do you want to keep going? Or?
Sure. Okay. Zakarans believe their own culture is more civilized than that of their barbaric neighbors. Certainly, the Zakaran concept of purity is more complex. Throughout the land of fate, purity means avoiding all unnecessary physical contact between a man and a woman unless they are married, however inadvertent or innocent that contact may seem.
I think reading the next paragraph is probably because it adds, it's pretty much this extended.
Oh yeah, okay. So please, if you want to continue.
Sure.
That. Or did you mean we skipped that one, Adam Ali?
No, I mean, I think it's
okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, please continue then, Mariam, and then we'll talk about it.
I apologize, Mariam.
Yes.
No, it's okay. It gives me time to roll my eyes. Every honorable Zakaran woman would extend her hand to help a wounded man, but almost none would shake hands with a man who is newly introduced, lest he assume her improper or be violently tempted by her charms. Instead, a simple nod is the proper greeting. In strictly religious areas, even a flirtatious glance is considered a sin. At the very least, a man who openly casts fiery glances at an unmarried woman has paid her an insult rather than a compliment. Her brother or father would be perfectly in the right to demand some sort of retribution, from a public apology to a gift of many camels. Really? Depending on the woman's stature and the amorous man's audacity.
I feel like
so sorry.
a gift of many camels. That's another square on my personal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Look, I'm
So
worth at
Daniel
least
here,
12.
I feel like as producer, I feel like it's worth showing something that Ahmed shared with us earlier.
Yes,
Yes.
please do it.
So
Please
What
do.
can you
Ahmed shared with us this amazing annotated document showing off parts of this page that can and should be used in his game. And here it is. There's nothing that should be used. Daniel out. I will let you folks go back to the conversation, but I figured
It's all redlined.
Even the title of the section is redlined.
if anyone in the chat is curious as to whether this laughter is like, oh, this is funny, you could use that. Just keep in mind.
No.
I had
There's a
When
point
you
I
can't
really want to
cry,
make.
you-
Like, yeah, when you
When you
can't
can't cry, you
laugh.
laugh.
okay.
So, like,
gonna
there's a
start,
really important point I think needs to be made in respect to the fact that this is a game where people play characters, many different kinds of characters who have to work together in a team, which is how do you have a mixed gender party when the book itself is telling you that in this world, men and women are so like segregated from mixing in this way. Like, how do you have a D&D party in this setting?
And
Well,
it
you don't, they're all
immediately makes the women PCs whores, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this book is full of the Madonna whore complex, like all the way through.
To say the good thing, at least the Khara doesn't have catcalling because it's bad. So okay.
Yeah,
But
it totally makes up for it.
No, so
Hey, but what happened if you're playing a tabaxi and they need to get your attention?
then they keep quiet and hide their face behind a veil. It says so in the book.
yeah.
So I really do want to have a quick touch on the name of this section, because this section is called Purity. And if you think that this is going to change at all from being male-female relations, nope. Which begs the question, why is this called Purity and why is this not just called, marriage? I mean, don't get me wrong. It's still bad. It's a bad section.
Yes.
But the name itself kind of indicates how, I mean, they had this wonderful talk yesterday where I was referenced many times, unfortunately, on this stream when they were talking about L5R, when your flavor text can really bias your viewer's opinion. The term purity does that, and it does it with a lot of intention. Because otherwise they would have just called it marriage. They called it purity to evoke a certain image, and that image cannot be forgotten. Both an image, by the way, that wasn't good in the 1990s and isn't good now either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the word purity has a lot of cultural baggage behind it, especially when it comes to issues of gender and sexuality. And it's just wading right into there with absolutely no shame.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they didn't want to call it sexual impropriety.
Yeah.
Also, purity
the sexual
is fine.
impropriety section.
This is a section on like morals and values. Purity gives it a higher moral weight. Like purity is a strong moral sounding word, right?
Yeah, and also ties it to a religious connotation as well.
Yeah, and this is also, so another good point to mention, considering we just talked on religion, is that the last time religion was mentioned was when they half-heartedly mentioned the Grand Caliph earlier on. That's it. We don't know what the religion of Zahara really is right now.
Yeah, well, they want to sort of evoke the idea, the concept of Islam, but they don't want to actually like say specifically what it is. And obviously they probably will go into like the D&D deities in this book at some point, but that's the image they want you to have in your head, like the whole way through, without having to say it.
Especially
And
because,
it's all the bad cliches and stereotypes.
Like what they're doing here is that, okay, these people are behaving like this. We're not saying they're bad. Oh, the contrary, they are perfectly fine. They are polite, and this is perfectly normal.
Mm-hmm.
You could get married, and a week later, you could get divorced. It's perfectly fine. This is normal. This is what?
Okay.
it's
So to pull us into the specifics of the text for a second, and to like break down a couple of the things of like why this is an issue. So there's the obvious layer of like the rampant sexism in here, right? Like you're reproducing real world sexism, perceived or otherwise, in your game for no purpose other than you think it is accurate. Mm-hmm. But two, there is a room for conversation on like historical gender roles in Islam and like But that's not even accurate to how this is. Like, for example, at the time of Prophet Muhammad, his wives, and Sayyidina Aisha, for example, would be like active in the community, active in helping people out. There wasn't like, yes, there are some rules around gendered interactions, and there's some room to discuss that and or critique that and whatever, but they were not completely cut off from being allowed to interact with men. A lot of them were community leaders. The first university was founded by a woman, stuff like that. Like, women weren't isolated from their ability to interact with men or the greater community. And so beyond the level of like, oh, the usual, it's it's historical, we have to replicate it. It isn't historical to the region you're trying to replicate.
And history has been rewritten.
Yes,
I mean,
Yeah.
one
it's been rewritten a lot by colonialism.
Yeah.
one of the things that's really weird here is that the whole marriage is sacred thing. Because if marriage is a contract like this describes, and you can divorce readily, and some marriages are designed to be very short, that's more secular than it is, which, to be honest, kind of makes sense. Because in this, at least the Islam I was taught, and I should mention this because there's a lot of sex to Islam, but in the Quran, marriage isn't, it's a secular thing. Marriage is literally a contract. It is a contract between two people. You sign it, and that is it. There's nothing sacred about that. It is not destined in heaven or whatever. And the reason why it's important to mention that is that they have that, a little bit of that. It's bad, but they have a little bit of that in that first paragraph and throughout even. But they immediately counteract it by calling it sacred, which kind of illustrates just how much they didn't really know the themes that they were playing around with. Because that kind of hypocrisy may not trigger to a person who has no idea what they're talking about, but to anyone who's got the slightest knowledge of this stuff, immediately the alarm bells go off.
And if I may go on a very small tangent, when I was getting married in 2012 in Canada specifically, every single mosque and everything basically said you have to have your oh gosh, the word, but
Partner?
where you sorry?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, what was the word you were saying?
I just said partner, but I assume you meant something else.
Partner. But basically I had to have a registered like marriage or whatever in Canada. I had to follow Canadian law first, and then essentially what they would do is just like icing on the cake. Like, there's no, I mean, yes, you can have an Islamic marriage, but it's no different from getting a marriage anywhere else in the world. It's a contract.
To continue that tangent briefly, there's this concept of what's called private marriage, which basically says, and this is sort of like the hyper-secularized version of this, which is basically the government only ever gives out civil union certificates. They don't marry people. They only ever give out civic union certificates or common law certificates. You go ahead and get whatever, married or hand-fasted or bonded in front of your community, whatever that looks like, right? And so anyway, I want to put that aside as just one little thing. Private marriage. It's an interesting concept.
So I have a couple of things I wanted to mention. So one, kind of going further down the list of like issues, right? The last sort of section, so assume we just accept that a look or whatnot is an insult, right? Let's assume for a second that that's fine. The person who then demands the justice or recompensation for the insult is the brother or father, which is again another example of like just the same level of sexism, but B, if you're playing a character who's a woman, you're stripping agency from that character. You're saying if anything happens to that character, the other party members have to do the action to fix it. And then getting into the specifics of the gift. I feel like we have a lot to say about this. So let's talk about a gift of many camels.
Wait, I'm not worth a buttload of camels?
Yeah. I mean, women are property, and their honor and safety can be exchanged for goods. Like,
and or services.
obviously.
Well,
Goods and
what happens
services.
if I'm not a woman?
This is the capitalism we wanted.
I will say this. If you do intend to marry me, I expect a gift of no less than 10 camels. Just saying.
So
Important to mention.
But yeah, like the language used throughout this whole thing, I mean, throughout the whole book so far, but there's just a few bits here that you can really pull out, like the gift of many camels. I feel like the way that sentence is structured is meant to sound exotified. And then things like fiery glances and the use of veiled, again, the woman whose unveiled face graces his bedchamber, like all the language here is meant to exotify this setting, like completely. And yeah, it's pretty gross.
And to sort of, oh, sorry, go ahead, Amr.
I just thought Ahmed had something to say. I wanted to make clear that we weren't talking over him.
Oh no,
Okay.
this is like the whole thing is just absolutely useless to add in the whole thing. So there's really no conversation about it. You should not put any of this in your game. This is not something you are able to capture in a fantasy world to describe properly. Just stay away from it. Like relationships, these are very special things that the character is gonna involve them, and the player is gonna be involved in them, and you're gonna restrict them or gonna do things that are very uncomfortable for them. So don't touch on these details. Like they let them make their own assumptions of, or their own expectations of how marriage or relationship work. Let them deal it out with the GM. Just don't put it like this at all.
The last thing I want to say, and it's a very short thing. At this point, and I think I'm realizing it as I read this, at this point, I think the term barbarian, barbaric, barbarism, just stop using it in TTRPGs. I'm sorry, but it's and I think this is a lot coming from yesterday too, when I read that disadvantage and cried in chat. That word is so tainted, and it is used heavily against ethnocentralized countries. And yes, in this case, the ethnic country is saying this about their neighbors. That doesn't make it better, because it's just repeating what white people say about us, but using our faces to tell that story.
Yeah.
It's, don't use that word anymore.
Yeah, I think we brought it up a couple of times actually, of like this issue of certain words having baggage and sort of like cultural meanings behind them that maybe some people aren't aware of, but things like barbaric, things like veils and some of the other language that we've discussed here, like definitely consider whether particular words have certain connotations that you might not be aware of. Like the word purity as well, we talked about that in quite a bit of depth.
Can I say something about veils?
Go ahead.
I've been watching a lot of videos about Rime of the Frost Maiden, and hearing what the designers and the writers describe. A lot of the description for that campaign is about the sense of isolation and how that not being able to see the person's face it gives a sense of dread, which was absolutely fine because the setting is very different. It's not related to Arabs. But the fact is, in Arabs, when you're living in a desert, everybody is covering their faces. It's sandy. You have everybody, men and women. This is the standard. Everybody's covering their faces. It's not just snow. Yeah. It's sand as well.
I mean, if I may, actually, Emmett, I have a question about that then. Did they ever use the word veil to refer to the facial coverings in Rime of Frost Maiden? Or did they use, like, they were wrapped in a scarf or they're covered?
Yeah, they did not. I don't think they used veil.
And
yeah. At least not in the videos. I did not check the book.
That doesn't surprise me because I feel like veil has quite a like gendered connotation as well as a racialized one. It is distinctly feminine, I think, when it's used usually.
I really hate the word veil because like even within like Urdu and Hindi, the word for essentially the thing that you would use to cover your head or to cover your face or whatever has multiple names, and it just refers to the piece of cloth rather than the loaded English word, which seems to be the catch-all for all of these words.
So
because
actually,
veil is a verb.
The word just means scarf to some degree, right?
Yeah.
So there's two things I actually want to say from what's been covered real quick. One is on the topic of the gift of camels real quick, as like a final note. We talked before, if you go back to the honor section, if you are able to, and have the temperament to, we talked about the concept of gifts and punishments for crime, recompense for crime being monetary or labor or whatnot. And so in that way, like the idea of an insult being repaid with a gift is fine. It's the specific issue of camels being used as the one example in this section to perpetuate
Ghosts
stereotypes.
exist.
That's the problem. Second, on the topic of veils, actually, some fun historical info before we dive into the next section that I figured might be interesting for some folks that I recently learned about. But going off what Mariam was saying about the word veil and mostly being a word for a fabric and having a bunch of different iterations, the current concept of the Islamic veil as a face covering that women wear in this capacity is relatively it kind of evolved over time. The face covering veil, I forget if it was Byzantine or Sasanian, but it was a sort of outside concept merged with the existing concept of a fabric that separated spaces inside a person's home to create a private space for women and men within a home that then became a sort of personal thing. And it's evolved in meaning, which means we should 100% respect the modern concept of veil because it is still meaningful to a lot of cultures and a lot of people. But it's just an interesting historical thing to see how the fabric evolved with the interaction of Islam with different cultures to mean different things over time, and to a degree as a result of politics and certain political agendas.
Thank you. And if I can step in here and put my sort of Edward Said Orientalism classes on for a second, one of the things that whenever we're reading this section on purity is, and this is a common thing whenever in an Orientalist framework, it's a very common thing. So I came across this when I was studying Buddhism, for example, as well, where you try to understand, quote, the other in terms of your own history or your own background and your own kind of experience. And that's sort of, I want to highlight because a bunch of the stuff they talk about here really just sounds like medieval, concepts of chivalry and purity and the fair, pure maiden, but, sort of with the serial numbers filed off and given a bit of a flavor that was right, temporary marriages are kind of a thing in Islam, so we'll put that in. But that's kind of a thing here too. So I'm reading through this and I'm kind of going okay, could I see, what was her name in King Arthur, the fair maiden?
Guinevere?
Guinevere. Yeah. So is this Guinevere in one of the Knights of the Round Table? If it fits, then it's probably not actually about the culture that they're actually supposed to be trying to talk about. They're really just talking about their own thing and projecting that experience out there, which is something that doesn't show up in the main D&D, even though it is supposed to be based on medieval kind of ish fantasy stuff too. And specifically, I wanted to touch on something that Adam Ali brought up that I am losing track. Oh, sorry. Yes. This concept of more civilized than their barbaric neighbors. This is something that Edward Said specifically writes about in his book about the power relation that you get between different cultures. And if your own only experience is to look down at other cultures and see them as basically playgrounds for you to kind of, take out whatever seems intriguing to you, exotify what isn't sort of something that you can just pull out right away and other it, then if that's the only framework you have, then the only thing you can say about that culture is, oh, they probably do the same thing to us, rather than experiencing and appreciating the diversity and the beauty of every culture in its own right.
Yeah.
You kind of just go, okay, they also have a similar kind of power relation of us, them, but in this case, it's them better, we lesser.
Yeah.
Again, is a hallmark of Orientalist thinking.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of how there's a lot of problems with the Disney Pocahontas movie we don't have time to get into right now, but there is the one song where sort of they both sides the issue, and both the Native Americans and the invaders are singing about how the others are savages, and they thought they were being super clever by making that point, and they really, really weren't, because they completely ignore the power dynamics at play when it comes to colonialism and racism and Orientalism.
A quick final point. I actually want to piggyback off of what Ammar was saying about the does it fit in a European setting? So a while back for a friend's podcast, I read the Terry Pratchett Discworld book Pyramids. And Pyramids is nominally set in a Egyptian country. It's a standalone book, or Egypt-inspired country. And when I was reading it, and a lot of my feedback on that podcast episode ended up being, this would be 99% better. There was still some problematic stuff because of some of Terry's earlier writing, and there's still some sexist bullshit in it. But it would be 99% better if he just removed the Egyptian aesthetic, because he was writing London with an Egyptian skin on it. And similar to this work, there's some stuff that's like this that just throw it all out. It has no place in any setting, no matter what. But there's a lot of time when you're writing that I think it's worth asking yourself, are you writing a X inspired setting? Are you doing work in this culture, and are you doing that culture justice, or are you writing your own culture with a brown skin, right? Like, because that's basically what a lot of that is, right? Is you're writing European values with a brown skin on the entire book, basically. And if it's that, just write your European culture. Obviously, remove the sexist bullshit that, like, is in here, but it will be better. I promise you, it will be a lot more interesting because you'll be able to write more honestly to your experience. You won't be half-assing and aesthetic, and you'll be able to write your values authentically in a way that is interesting. You'll have better comedy, better way, because you'll be able to make better cultural references. Like, we could probably write better settings in here because we'll be able to make some fun, neat cultural references and inside jokes and make them accessible. You can do the same with your own culture. But if you do genuinely want to write in another culture, make sure you are not writing your own values into it. You're writing the thing you are writing about authentically.
That's a very good point, Ammar, but I do have to correct you on one thing.
Yeah.
You can't piggyback off of me because pigs are haram.
Oh, you're right. Shit. Wait, hold on. That's also haram. I can't swear.
I mean, the word shit specifically depends on the place, because apparently feces on different cultures is either like, yes, you can't use the word, you can't whatever, whereas it's an everyday conversation and every mother asks their child before they leave the house, did you do one? But the one little thing I did want to sort of add, since this is D&D material, is that, hey, there's a barbarian word that is very prominent, which is i.e. the class. And I personally don't like using that word. And I'm perfectly fine with berserker kind of being if you're moving away from the barbar root word, of using berserker instead. I know that's also a like an archetype, but I feel like, hey, if you changed one thing, you probably can change what the archetype is too.
Yeah.
Rage warrior.
In Arabic, in my Arabic translation for the SRD, I used rager instead of barbarian because
sounds like a drink.
Because we have people call the Amazigh people as barbar, which is extremely offensive to them. So for us to use this as to continue using the same word is going to be another problem. We're just extending it.
I think we need to move on because we're halfway through a stream and we're not even halfway through period.
Okay, Adam Ali, I think you're. Oh no, sorry. Next up is Ahmed. If you want.
Am I just listed 20 times the list of reading?
Okay, so this part goes to Aqil Danani, who says that the easy solution: play a party entirely of women with and face no consequences. So this is for you, my friend. In a world where strength of character is exalted, the Kharans have peculiar belief in every man and woman's underlying weakness where matters of the heart are concerned. It's for this reason that many women wear veils and don robes that conceal the shape of their bodies. It's for this reason that a few groups require men to do the same. That is, to cover their bodies and the lower half of their faces whenever they are in public. Not surprisingly, eyes, hands, and feet have become important objects of beauty in the human or even non-human Zakharan form. Women line their eyes with kohl. Some tattoo their foreheads with a simple pattern. Others may decorate their brows with dots of henna, a natural dye which may also redden their nails. Bracelets adorn their wrists and ankles. So basically, you need both men and women to survive as an adventurer, because there are things that only men can do.
If I may, could you read the next paragraph too, because it's also about appearances?
Yeah, sure. So, believing that even eyes and hair creates too great a temptation, some sects in the land of fate require a woman to don an opaque hood whenever she's in public, concealing her entire head. The cloth has many tiny holes over the eyes, allowing her to look out, but preventing others from looking in. The rest of her body is completely engulfed by voluminous robes that sweeps the ground. Yeah. Notice, just before they were saying even men need to cover, and now only women have to cover everything.
Yep.
Say that I absolutely fucking hate this entire section,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be here. It's ridiculously restrictive, and just like, as a woman reading this, I'm just like, I don't want to play this game, basically, because you clearly don't want me to play this game as a woman. Frankly, I think it's insulting that this is in here.
I think that probably says everything we could say about that.
Hey,
move
loophole. Being
forward.
non-binary means I don't have to listen to either of these things.
Quick final note out that, like, even before they get into the details, like when they're initially describing that sometimes men have to cover themselves as well, notice how women have to veil themselves, but men only cover the lower half of their faces. Even from the get-go, the like covering is unequal.
Yeah.
We've seen this kind of equivocation before when it comes specifically to the rules about women, that they've done this repetitively where they've said and also men and also men, but they never actually talk more beyond that one sentence, and then they immediately move on. Because truth is, this is kind of the sign that, like, an editor said, if this applies to men, you got to mention it a bit more often, because they're focusing a lot on what they assume to be Islamic modesty rules for women, trying to write it, and then talking a little bit about men here and there too. And by the way, like, when it comes to modesty in Islam, there are certain facets of it that men do observe. They're different, but we don't see that here because they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. They're just drawing haphazardly, which in general is like a thing that we've talked about repetitively before. Like, there's not only one source for what's in here. There's all sorts of different kinds of veils mentioned, but treated as all the same.
Before
sorry.
The one thing I want to mention before we get too bogged down repeating stuff is, I will say there's actually one sentence in this page that I think is worth saving, and it is, I honestly think, a decent description of henna. Like, it's not a bad description of henna.
I was about to bring this up. So there is, obviously I just like ripped this to shreds. I think there's another point I should probably make it alongside that, which is that for those that don't know, I'm also a costume designer for theatre and film. So things like clothing and what they imply about the person wearing them, I think, are very important when you're building any kind of story or setting. So absolutely do think about describing clothing that people would wear in an RPG setting, in a fantasy story, or whatever. I think it's actually very important, but I feel like for the most part, this is not the way to do it, because the way in which they are using the clothing of the people of this culture is to place restrictions upon mostly women, and to some extent also men, but it's mostly women. I was going to say, actually, I do kind of like the description of the henna. I like that at least it is there. But for the most part, I really feel like you could do a lot better with using people's clothing to describe something about them, because they're also making like this sort of blanket brush statement, this blanket statement, and saying basically there is no delineation in different styles of clothing among this population. They're describing them all as wearing, all the women are wearing the same type of clothing for the most part, which doesn't serve a purpose. It just restricts. You could go into so much more detail describing different types of fabrics that are used in different places for different reasons, different types of clothing that are worn by people who have different occupations for different reasons, and that would tell you something about the world you're trying to inhabit and play in.
Look, they're all getting ready for Halloween, okay?
I actually want to like piggyback off that with a really quick point. Like, I think this is a point I've seen brought up by folks who, especially folks who are hijabi themselves, or folks who do character design art, that a lot of y'all, and this even applies to some of us who are like from the community, are really bad with our design of hijabi characters in making them really plain. Like, there's a lot you can do with fashion design in hijab and hijab compliant outfits.
Yeah.
Like in modern stuff, there's even small things like pins. A lot of people will have like small pins to like tie together their hijab, and will do something that personalizes them. Different colors, fabrics that match, like as I was saying. Be like, even if you're saying, okay, this is a society where like everyone is super covered, you can still create a whole diversity of looks that isn't just, yes, one black fabric, one white fabric.
Yeah.
We're done.
And
yeah, you
Instagram
can-
has some great superhero hijabi cosplays.
There's
Like
more
that are
than-
Yeah.
amazing. Like all over any social media medium, there's
Yeah.
like cosplayers doing amazing things.
And there's a lot of modern like Muslim fashion designers who are like hijabi fashion designers specifically for women who wear hijab, and it's amazing what they do.
There's also
there's some really cool stuff out there. You don't have to limit yourself.
there's more than just one fit. There's more than one type. Even just the hijab itself, it's worn multiple different ways. And this also goes to turbans, if you're interested in including them. There's more than one kind of turban. The diversity is what we're missing here. And this is a good place, I would say, if you were talking about clothing more than just this weird marriage talk, to actually have some art that references it. I would love to see like some hands with henna styles to give more of an impact, or, show me a bit more with what those tattoos on the forehead look like.
Yeah, you could do a really interesting, like I have a lot of costume books like right up here that have sort of, different styles of costume from different periods and different locations, where they have like a whole page with different examples for what different genders and different people of different classes, people of different occupations would wear. You could do a chart. I know you love that, D&D, of a sort of a whole page of like different garments and different styles in which they're worn by different people. That would actually be really interesting to see, and would also give players something like visual to latch onto, maybe if they're thinking of playing a particular class or a particular race in this world.
I also want to know.
Sorry, just as a bit of a tangent here, but does anybody remember the woman who wore an American flag as the hijab on Fox News a few years ago?
Yes.
Yes.
There's many different ways to represent the hijab.
Also, Ahmed, you dropped a link in chat. Do you want to talk about it real quick?
Ghada, she's an artist from Qatar. I've been following her for a while. She does amazing clothes, like her art. Whenever she paints Arabian girls in clothes and the hijab, it's very amazing. I absolutely recommend people to follow her and check her out.
Just did.
For those who are listening in on audio and don't have the chat, especially if it's on YouTube later, it's Ghada X, so GHADAAX on Twitter.
Fantastic.
I have it on screen right now.
The voice of God Daniel also brought up a good point in the Zoom chat that a lot of these books are made with minimal art budgets. And I think we're going to get to this conversation later when we see more art. But it's important to mention what they do spend that budget on, because it's so limited. A lot of the art not only exemplifies the problems in the writing, but compounds it.
Oh yeah, a lot of it is sort of straight up the exact stereotype you would expect, which I'm not surprised to see in this book, frankly, at all. But I think because we're talking about ways in which people now can improve and move forward, like use references that are not the same two references over and over again, and check out art and fashion by people from those cultures for inspiration, if that is something you are serious about doing.
Got one more thing left for purity.
Yeah, so I was about to say, do we want to go on to the last paragraph before?
Yeah, I guess I'm next in the cycle. Oh God, and I got this one.
Yeah.
I really hope nobody ever clips this out of context and said, "This is what Ammar is saying."
We will fight those people.
Yeah, geez. Okay. Purity is also the basis for the seclusion of women, a common practice in the land of faith. Whether home is a tent, a mud brick house near an oasis, or a grand palace, it usually contains separate quarters for women, an area where no grown man but a husband may venture. And even then, he typically asks permission as a courtesy. The degree to which a woman must remain, actually, I think there's an editing typo here.
Yeah, there should be a remain in.
Yeah, remain these quarters varies. For instance, the laws of Saharan hospitality require a woman to act as a host in her husband's absence, serving an honored or needy guest who comes to their abode by offering coffee or food. Were her husband to appear later, she might politely retire to her quarters. Although foreigners might view seclusion as a prison, a Saharan woman often sees it as her privilege as well as a sanctuary.
I would just like to note
The
the three
hypocrisy.
types of house: tent, mud brick, or palace.
That's all there is. That's all there is.
Yep.
So actually, you know what? If I may, I want to have a little bit of a deep dive into that, because what that exemplifies, the three different types of living structure, a palace, a mud house, and a tent, it indicates a very high separation between the upper class and lower class. Yeah, I'm getting into that right now. Which is usually indicative of, in many medieval societies, of a downturn in economics, right? We didn't have like the kind of middle class that we expect to have today. We don't have the same kind of middle class people often think we do, but I'm not going to get too much into capitalism. My point is that this does not show a society in good health. It shows a society that is slowly falling apart by that increasing separation. And now, to be fair, they have already indicated that before, because we've seen this before, that a lot part of the haunted lands used to be populated, but now are gone. But I referenced this because that was my first episode, and I wanted to get every single word, and I could. I didn't know when I'd be back. Turns out I was chained to this desk forever. But it brings up an interesting point that often when describing these societies, describing our societies, describing societies that are not just a medieval white society, that they choose to portray them constantly in decline, rather than the golden ages many of them were famous for.
Yeah, there's also definitely, I think we've brought it up before, but it might be worth saying again if we have, this idea of it's a very Orientalist lens, again, to describe the other, the Orient, as a place that is both decadent and in ruin and therefore in need of saving. And those are the two examples here. We have tents and mud houses, which are desolate, and we have palaces that are decadent, and those are the only two things available.
It's also like feeds into the stereotypes of the
This
types of
mud
abodes
houses.
they chose, right? Like, oh, I'm going to say something.
Sorry, I don't diss mud houses. They're really cool. They're really nice. I mean, cool in terms of temperature, because this is what we still build in my area, in my homeland, Hadramaut. We still use mud houses, and even the richest people, they still use that.
Yep.
But I
You
agree,
mentioned wind
this
towers.
contrast.
Yeah,
It's the way in which it's framed. It's not.
It's
Yeah.
the implication
yeah, there's
that a
a-
mud house is
But
lower
mud brick
class.
houses are
Yeah.
really awesome. Just
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a practical use for them, but
Yeah.
that's not what the book is
there's
saying.
a reason mud brick houses are used, and it's because they're really effective.
The
But-
reason why they're written in here, though, is because we're writing from a Western 1990s-ish lens, which indicates that we're talking about the mud houses. We're not talking about actual houses, honestly. We're talking about probably what some people are imagining when they read this, 1 or 2 room buildings that have very low ceilings and look like they're falling apart. Because that's an image that they're trying to evoke. This is on purpose. This is one of those things where the image that they're evoking, because of where they wrote it and when they wrote it, it's a purposeful thing. They may have not meant it to be hazardous, but they still did what they did on purpose. And that is an important point to mention.
And as an example, in Dubai, like a couple of the heritage places, they're made out of mud brick houses, and they're gorgeous. They do not evoke in any shape or form like desolate or poor or sad. They're palaces of their own. They have wind towers, which didn't require air conditioning because those wind towers were very good air circulators.
Before we move on to like the big point, I think to like wrap it up, the two sort of roots of the problem here that are being played on are, 1, the compare and contrast that was expertly laid out by everyone, and 2, the fact that when you deal with stereotypes, you have to put in more effort to challenge them, right? We've mentioned this in a lot of places before, and that's what Mariam was just mentioning with the mud houses. And like mud houses, and Ahmed as well pointed out, are really practical. They can be really big or small. They can be beautiful or simple. But when you don't do the effort to describe them, when you present them as a one word in this context, you rely on people's stereotypical image of them and don't do any work to challenge that. And that's where the harm comes from.
Yeah,
Mud houses,
exactly.
should probably still be in your Arabian setting. In fact, they're awesome. Look up cool mud brick houses. Talk to Ahmed. Get like cool.
I did share a few pictures from my home a while
Yeah.
back.
Talk to Ahmed. Look up pictures online, and then do a cool job describing them. You can do awesome works with that.
And
we
the
tell
word
him?
association too, just very quickly, that mud more often brings images of like dirty or like muddy and all of those things in a section about purity, which is like, you know, gives that stark contrast.
All right. Shall
I think we
talk
can't
about-
push it. Yeah, we can't push it off any longer.
Yeah.
This is sexist as fuck.
And hypocritical. It's contradicting itself. Like, oh, so a woman's a host when their man's not there, but what happens if you don't have a female guest? The woman's just supposed to be like, nope, I can't look at you. I can't actually be a host. Yeah. I'm damned if I serve you. I'm damned if I don't.
Yeah. The thing I really hate about this as well is like the very end where they say that the Zaharan woman sees this seclusion as a privilege as well as a sanctuary. And I'm just like, absolutely fucking not. Like, no, thank you.
No.
Do not try to imply that the women are okay with this and therefore it makes it okay for it to be in your setting, because this is sexist as fuck, like Adam Ali said.
I'm familiar with that narrative, and I'm sure everybody else here is too, which is occasionally people, especially well-meaning progressives in sort of the Western world, will occasionally try to push back against the like women are oppressed just because they're wearing a hijab narrative by saying, well, no, it's actually a thing of empowerment, and which again is just more white people telling us how we feel.
Yeah,
exactly.
Doesn't
love
work
doing
very well.
We're really busy having a camel measuring contest.
I won.
Is now a good time
I
for a
was-
break? Oh, sorry, please go
I
ahead.
was gonna say actually, like, on this topic, like, I again go back to it was our honor episode. We talked about a similar concept of like we had our fun conversation about like honor in our families and how like, you know, parents paying the bill, and a lot of the time was talking about how, like, how our dads were usually the ones rushing to like be the most hospitable in that scenario, and like limiting hospitality here to something that women do, and like in a lot of my experiences men do a lot of the same. It just is whoever is around. Like I've experienced equal hospitality no matter whose home I'm visiting, and sometimes I've gone to homes where people do have this sort of like structure where it's expected that the wife or the mom or whatever is the one in charge of the hospitality, and I've gone to homes where it's usually the dad or the patriarch or whatever.
I mean, hospitality is just huge. in our
We're that's a good point. That this paragraph, like many of the paragraphs that come before it, is a transition paragraph. It's designed to move forward to the hospitality section, get you thinking about that ahead of time. So what is it introducing you to? Sexism. It's introducing you to sexism and a bit of that, you know, wealth gap that we talked about before. It's not really introducing it in a positive manner, and this is a problem that we have overall, where none of these concepts are ever really talked about positively. It's always a harping upon the negative that causes one watching this to ask themselves, why are they playing this when they could play literally anything else? Obviously, a lot of what we're talking about will be applicable to the hospitality section, which we'll do in a second. Well, a little bit. We're going to take a break first. But I do want to mention one more thing. Were her husband to appear later, she might politely retire to her quarters. Why is she hiding from her husband now?
No, because there's male guests. So once the husband is there, she's leaving.
It doesn't even
Now
mention male
they're-
guests yet.
It's utter
Because-
nonsense that shouldn't be here.
We haven't mentioned male guests yet. I mean, don't get me wrong, Ahmed. I think you're right. That's where they intended to go. But like, it for all this talk of how marriages happen and they're passionate, that's where that kind of passion is explored. The one time they get the chance to describe one, it is the exact opposite. It's distant and cold. And it's one of the things that I find a bit less offensive than other things, but I hate more, in that a lot of how people talk about our various cultures, it is stale and bitter, and especially when they get into topics of arranged marriage, when the truth is love is not always described within the perfect nuclear family that was based upon a love marriage like it is in the West. That's not realistic. It's extremely biased and very harmful.
Like the whole section here can be summarized as a Western person trying to describe conservative Muslims in a way that, oh, brothers and sisters who are from my Western world, they're not so bad.
Mhm.
Like, this is the whole thing. Like, they're trying to describe a very conservative Islamic culture, but trying to appeal to Westerners that it's still not so bad.
Yeah, and it definitely, like, this is definitely like the progressives' perspective on it, and I mean, I guess that's sort of the capital C charity in here. Like, this is clearly somebody who does want to sort of put that thing there, but
Yeah, that last sentence just bothers me so much.
My big takeaway is check your racism for consistency. Like, if you're gonna be racist to us, at least have like a consistent and non-contradictory logic. I'd like my racism with a little bit of like thought in it. All right,
Yeah,
you know.
That's
effort into
assuming
it.
racism has logic to begin
Yeah.
with. It is completely irrational.
Very
and
generous of you.
yeah.
Listen,
Well,
I can
it's
dream
when
of a
you-
world where our enemies think somewhat.
Yeah.
That would require them putting energy into their hate, and they're just lazy,
Or
really.
caring, or
No,
or thinking at
or
all
caring.
that they are your enemy.
Mm.
They don't. They think this is the natural. That's the one thing about racism that I think we don't often talk about enough. To us, like to a lot of the majority of racists, not the really virulent ones protesting on streets with maskless faces right now. I'm talking about the average racist. They don't see themselves as our enemy or us as their enemy. They think this is the natural way of things. And the fact that we deny that is insulting to them and to their intelligent minds.
And oppressive to them.
I might, sorry, we are getting quite a
Yeah,
bit past the hour. We were hoping to take a quick break. So we just put a pin in that thought. We will come back in short, let's say about 5 minutes. That work for everybody?
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Love y'all.
Yeah, we took a short break and we're back now. Hopefully that also gave us an opportunity to cleanse our palate a little bit from that last section, which was pretty challenging, and there was a good opportunity for us to check in with ourselves, of course, as well, and with each other. But now we're going to get into something that's hopefully a bit easier, a bit lighter fare, and it's on hospitality. And I believe next one in the initiative. Sorry, is that okay there, Maria? Or are you just trying to get the focus right?
Yeah, the focus for my camera.
It's nice.
Sorry.
It's good
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
For the hospitality section, so yes, Isa is next in the initiative order, if you'd like to go ahead.
Okay. Hospitality. Shall I read the proverbs as well, since we did talk
Please
about
do
them?
it.
The guest is the lord of the house is a Haran proverb. Guests are like fish, after 3 days both stink. Albatian proverb. In the land of fate, generosity brings honor, while stinginess spawns contempt. As a result, Zaharan hospitality is unrivaled. According to Zaharan ethics, a man must offer food and drink to anyone who appears at his doorstep as a friend, no matter how poor the host may be. In her husband's place, or when receiving female friends, a woman must do the same. If a guest comes to the door at night, a host must offer lodging as well as sustenance. A wealthy host may also offer entertainment, such as the dance of a talented servant, or perhaps even a gift. The obligation and desire to offer hospitality is as compelling as any personal need. A nomadic tribe whose foodstuffs are nearly gone may avoid a busy oasis, even if their water stores are equally low. The tribe would rather know thirst and hunger than be unable to offer hospitality to the strangers at the oasis. A host assumes responsibility for the well-being of his guests. Whether a man lives in a goat's hair tent or a lavish house, his honor depends on how well he treats those who place themselves in his care. For this reason, guests may expect safety as well as sustenance, even if they were once the host's enemies. Arsenic and other toxins are easy to obtain in the land of fate, and poison is a common way to eliminate foes. Nonetheless, once foes become guests and share the bond of salt, even they can eat heartily, expecting the host's protection as well as his friendship. In turn, the guests are expected to act as loyal friends, never overstaying their welcome and never overstepping the bounds of good behavior. Do we want to reflect on that before we move on to the bonds of salt?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Who would like to? Mariam, go ahead.
Can I just say that A wealthy host may also offer entertainment such as the dance of a talented servant and perhaps even a gift. I feel like this is like this weird projection of how every aspirant entertainer has a server job while they're trying to get rich, while they're trying to make it. But I know what it's actually trying to say,
Yeah.
like basically the whole, you know, the
belly dancer.
the veiled belly dancer. But I'd like to,
Yeah.
I'd like to just imagine this is what it really is.
So is
They're
that
projecting Hollywood
They're
starlets.
just freelance. They're just
Is-
freelance.
it's an important question to ask on this specific subject. Is that a thing in one of our cultures?
No.
No.
Yeah, I know exactly where it's from. This is from Rome. This is from ancient Rome. That is a thing ancient Romans would do. They would get one of their slaves to dance for their entertainment, which Roman slavery is very different from, you know, the modern connotation of slavery. We're not going to get into it. We don't have the time.
Oh.
But like the fact that it is Roman, the fact that I can tell that is Roman illustrates, like, we've had to say, okay, this is Arabian Adventures. Well, really, this is Arabia and the Middle East. Okay, this is including some of Pakistan, I guess. To now, I have to include like the entire Mediterranean. What is happening? Where are you drawing your sources from? Why are they so varied when you try so hard to be specific?
If I may
Yeah.
interject, what
Go.
as I don't want to say I'm defending them, but it is possible that in doing research they actually found. I mean, there are times especially in the Transjordan area where I worked, when Rome had a significant presence there.
That is true.
So it's possible that that's where I'm giving them a lot more credit than they deserve, but it's possible that that's where, you know, they're
Yeah.
finding some of their sources
I
from
think
Roman
the more-
occupation, which in itself is a problem.
Yeah, I think the more likely answer is that they watched a bunch of early Hollywood movies and saw scenes of like slave girl belly dancers dancing for people in tents, and that was where they got it from.
They watched Star Wars
Okay.
Episode 6 and then wrote this.
Yeah.
And also South Asian families, it's actually a thing where, you know, when people come to visit, you take your kids and you tell them, "Beta, please sing something for us," or do that little dance you learned in school, or count. Show us your number tables, how you've memorized them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which it'd be a lot different if they talked about what they did here is really they took a concept that they drew from movies, which itself really do draw from that kind of ideal, part of which does come from ancient Rome, who yes occupied a lot of places and thus have influence almost everywhere, but they took that and they accidentally hit something that was somewhat accurate, but with a ton of exotic flavoring on top. And it kind of illustrates the problem overall with when you are willy-nilly about your sources like this, or don't have cultural consultants, or you don't come from the culture. These are easy traps to fall into. And it's part of the problem. It's one of the reasons why this stream exists. You know, why we have to have this discussion. A lot of people say critique is easy. This is not easy for us. A lot of us do research beforehand. We read the books beforehand. Those content warnings, we have to create them. That's not on a fancy website for us. We have to do all this work because someone has to, because constantly people are given opportunities to explain our culture who are not part of our culture or who know nothing about our culture. And then they come up with stuff like this, drawn from a variety of sources, none of which match, and a lot of which ends up coming across as very hypocritical.
So I would.
Yeah. The only other thing I do wanted to point out while I have the quick time is that, again, with the goat's hair tent in the lavish house, we're seeing a little
So
bit of that.
I was actually wanted to like real quick hit the couple points that I don't think we should spend time on because we've already covered, but like are repeated issues.
Mhm.
There's this sexism divide in the first paragraph about who is being hospitable, when a woman is allowed to be hospitable versus when a man is. More restrictions on the woman again than the man. There is the compare and contrast between a goat's hair tent and a lavish house. And in my opinion, this is actually worse than the previous one because it explicitly disparages nomadic lifestyles and explicitly disparages a lot of nomadic cultures, which are often indigenous cultures to those areas. It perpetuates a lot of stereotypes, things that we've discussed about before, more so even than the mud brick house. But
Yeah. So
Do we wanna
a
bring
new
up-
one that's, sorry, Mariam.
Oh, and do we want to bring up the fact that it's a Zakharan proverb versus an Albadian proverb when they've already described the two types of people and the
So-
two.
I'll get to that in a second. I just want to finish the other thing real quick. the mentions of honor here is probably like the area, like we talked about this in the honor section. This is probably where honor should have been brought up in the first place, right? Like hospitality as a form of honor is the one we are most familiar with culturally, all of us. But it sucks because of the context that comes before. The other thing of like the guest having boundaries, that's a thing that should have been brought up more, because yes, like hospitality sort of knows no bounds in a lot of our cultures, but guests also know how to not overstep that. Like that is a thing that is drilled into us of like,
for big kids,
be hospitable. There's that weird like contrast of be hospitable but don't accept hospitality.
Don't be a burden.
I felt that myself.
I also kind of want to touch upon the whole poison thing. Because I mean, we sort of lightly touched upon this, the idea of like sort of deception and sneakiness and connivingness in this setting, and how it relates to some very uncomfortable stereotypes of brown people being untrustworthy. But they've just chucked it in as like, you can expect maybe to be secretly poisoned when you go to eat at someone's house. But then we're going to talk about how in this whole other section, the rest of it is about how it's sacred. And so again, it's
you might get poisoned, but never as a guest. That's what they're trying to say.
But that ends when the 3 days are up. So if you need to pack up the next morning, you may not get past the threshold.
There are some rations that are totally not poisoned because you are no longer a guest.
Allah. Oh God.
But it's just the specific idea of like the sort of deception of poisoning someone's drink. I think the image of that is quite it's clearly drawing from those same like Hollywood movie sources again. So
well, it's a medieval concept of that whole when you toast, you basically mix your drinks.
And the ironic thing is, because we've talked about this before, how they're drawing influences from European cultures, but then sort of putting it into brown cultures. Poison and the concept of like people being poisoned is rife in European theatre. Every bloody Shakespeare play has people being poisoned. But it's specifically brought up here to talk about Asian cultures.
Poisoning is the worst, just most dishonorable way to kill someone. Like you would go and get killed rather than poison someone. That is like the definition of honor when it comes to killing.
Actually,
sorry. I think there were a few people here. I want to make sure everybody got their say, because I know we got the conversation going there. Adam Ali, were you finished what you were saying earlier?
I had a very important addition that I just remembered.
Okay, sorry.
One that reflects,
not to derail, but let's just try.
Yeah, it's fine. One that reflects actually a lot of what not just we've talked about, but they've talked about Oriental Adventures, L5R, and beyond. And it comes specifically to the nomadic tribe avoiding an oasis out of fear. They would know thirst and hunger than be unable to offer hospitality to strangers. Where once again, this is a thing that has happened not just like with all of every single stream we've had so far. Every single stream has had an aspect of this where people would rather be honorable than live, to the point of to the point of absurdity. It's almost like this could be a comedy play about trying to avoid an oasis because you cannot feed your guests, which I would watch and enjoy. But this is not comedy. This is distinctly referenced as sort of a textbookish text. It's a very dangerous aspect of how Western cultures describe Eastern honor. And to be honest, a lot of Central honor as well. Because it comes down to, overall, we think that their honor comes not from compassion or intent. It comes from lack of anything else.
I want to agree with that and piggyback off it for a second. Sorry, I can't say that anymore. Ammar. I want to jump off of that.
Horsey back.
Halal. What are you saying?
Horses are Arabian as hell. Like
no, camelback. I would like to camelback off of that.
That is a different
y'all need a second? Okay. But like to an extent though, like there is truth to that of like I grew up like hearing I'm forgetting all the details, but like hearing a story about like a guest showing up like to a person's house, like that was like the only house for a long distance and they didn't have much, but they killed their only like cow or whatever to be able to feed the guest, even though that was a huge amount of their resources. And like how that's the proper thing to do. But at the same time, this is again where I feel like the bit about the guests knowing not to push their limits, because a guest would never demand hospitality to the point of killing the host, right? Like that's a thing that a guest would never ask for. They would never push the limits beyond that, while meanwhile hosts would, to a degree, be willing to self-sacrifice. Just the nuance is entirely lost here by not including any of that. It completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, and this is my takeaway based on experience of playing games where players have done very similar things, of look at these schmucks, look at how hospitable they are to us, and we can totally take them for a ride. And it's a very white way of viewing things. I am going to be that blunt.
It's I especially balk here because this is one of the times where I think even I've been dancing around the subject, where if you're going to write any of these texts, you need to remember who your audience is, and this audience is not built for any of the six of us. It's not, or anyone from any of the cultures referenced here. It's not. It's made for white Americans.
Men.
Men, yeah.
Yeah.
So at this point, I want to talk about the thing that Miriam brought up earlier with Al-Badian. Because there's a couple points there, and the reason I didn't bring it up earlier is because I was trying to go through the rapid points, but like I think this one deserves a bit of a conversation for two reasons. One, the word Badian with a quick control F shows up 2 times. They never explain what it is. So it's just kind of there. From a world building game design standpoint.
It's the Al-Badia, right?
What?
Yeah.
It's the Al-Badia?
It's Badia, but they're trying to make it. It's complicated.
It's
just
they're
Badia.
It's the
English conjugation.
nomadic.
Yeah. The other thing is, as far as I can see, like, actually, yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else others want to say about that real quick before I continue?
Yeah, the whole how they describe 2 communities of people, the Al-Badia and I'm sorry, I forget what the
Al-Hadar.
name.
Hadar.
Al-Hadar.
Yeah.
And then when they go into Proverbs or whatever, the Al-Badia is always separated from General Zakhara, even though they're 2 different communities. And rather than saying Al-Hadar and Al-Badia in Proverbs, they're doing Zakhara and Al-Badia, which again reinforces the kind of the poor or uneducated or whatever Bedouin lifestyle, and then the rest of Zakhara.
And at a minimum, others that. It's like there's the civilized people who you can connect with, dear reader. And I put civilized in big quotes there. And then there's the people who are wanderers and nomads.
Like, I want to add this, the concept of hospitality is everywhere. This is not exclusive to us. I think that as we go deeper into city lifestyles, this concept becomes more and more distant. Even for us here, the people living in the cities, hospitality is becoming less. And if you are hospitable, you are being naive. This is everywhere. So if you want to get in touch with the sense of hospitality, just look at smaller towns and how they behave around each other, small, knit, very close communities, and see how they support each other as sources of inspiration for hospitality. It doesn't have to go all the way to the middle of the world, finding Arabia to get some inspiration for hospitality. Just go to smaller communities, go to villages and small neighborhoods, and see how people approach each other. They share food, they celebrate different occasions. All of these are forms of hospitality.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead on.
I was going to add actually, like, so now that like that has been mentioned, that this is their way of mentioning Abadia, the fact that like my brain didn't even process that they were referring to like the Al-Badia tribe here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And like we've heard precious little from them since.
Yeah, we've heard very little.
They exist, and that's it.
Yeah, I like I kind of like we've been down in the like honor and morality sections for so long, I've forgotten the world building we'd covered at the start a little. But also
World building.
5 months ago.
That like the use of like the anglicization to associate with the Al-Badia by saying Al-Badian, like makes it so that like I read that in an entirely way that did not evoke Al-Badia to me, and again shows that it's written for a Western audience who's expecting Westernizations of how you give possessives.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
God.
So
Oh God, it's hell just going through these words.
it
Sorry.
makes no sense. A lot of it makes no sense. Just anyway. So the
Shall
next
we do-
thing, the next thing is a bond of salt. I want to ask, considering I'm the next reader, do you want to read the actual descriptions of the stories at all? Can we just skip that? Because I think we've talked about how stories are written and how they're just really biased. And instead, because I think if we just talk about the first 2 paragraphs and then the last paragraph, we'll cover all of the bond of salt, and that will be it. And we can, because we've got 15 minutes left.
Right. I mean, so for everybody's reference who isn't aware, that in the middle of this section, there is the story of Ali Baba and the 40 thieves.
Mhm.
So if you want to look that up, that's easily accessible on the Google. So we might just
There
go
are
ahead.
different versions of it, though.
Yep.
We don't have to read it, but I'm just saying as a
Yep.
note that
Mhm.
there are different versions, which may not be the same version as this book.
Good point.
In that case, do we want to sort of do the first 2 paragraphs wrap for today? And then we can actually, we're pretty close to wrapping up anyway. The last 15 minutes is usually just a retrospective anyway. So maybe we'll just
Yeah,
hold
we
off on
could
the
start
bonus.
Bond of Salt next
Yep.
time.
I'm cool with that. Bond of salt and piety next time around.
Yeah,
Oh boy. Hi,
Can I say something about Bond of Salt?
please.
So in Arabic culture, we have something called close to bread and salt, عيش وملح. So which is very similar to breaking bread in English. And the concept is that if you share bread, to share a meal with someone, there's a kind of bond here. I was curious, why did they chose bond of salt instead of bond of bread or bread and salt? So I researched this. It turns out in our culture, the bond of salt is a reference to milk kinship, which is a real thing.
Say it.
That
Just
if
say it.
if you have a milk kinship with someone, they are basically siblings to you,
Mhm.
and they are as good as blood bound to you. And we'll
Right.
dig deeper than that later.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, it sounds like they're maybe trivializing it a little bit by just saying anybody who comes eat at your table is that.
It's also this, like, again, we're going to talk about this next time, but this specificity is, like, the stories are kind of comedies about guests trying to avoid eating salt. Like, this specifically salt, despite the fact they mention in it that it's much more than just salt. It's about a meal.
Right.
And we'll dig deeper
Yeah.
next time.
We will dig deeper. General thoughts on the stuff that we kind of covered today.
Hospitality wasn't so bad.
But no, it wasn't so bad.
Compared to the other sections, which were abysmal.
Everything else was fine.
Yeah.
So, if reading like purity or honor, we're eating a mouthful of cinnamon, this is eating a mouthful of salt, in which I can technically swallow it. So yeah, it's better. I overall, I think they've fallen so much into tropes here, so much into some of the dangerous stuff we've already talked about, that even though this is less, it's less to the point of I will probably forget it exists. When I think of Zahara and Al-Qadim from now on, I will rarely think about hospitality because everything else is so pungent.
We're just
know.
really salty about this.
Mad Max
And,
gif. There's nothing but
this
salt.
is a good time to mention that this is my final episode.
Jeez, I hope not.
Don't everyone celebrate it once. Overall, though, I do want to touch upon not what we've read specifically today, but the book in general. How is this playable? That's not a question I want to answer. That's a rhetorical question. But so far, what we've read, we're 17 pages in. I don't know how to play in this world. Now, forget about how offensive it is. It's really offensive. Forget about how I am not stuck with questions like, how do I make a mixed gender party? Or how do I show any of this in... Forget about that. We've had 17 pages of world building, and so far I have no idea the overall arcing themes of this world, because what they've given me so far has just been a bunch of racist trash. It comes down to what I think we don't... Again, and it's another thing we don't often say, even though I think we probably should. A lot of this racist writing is also just bad writing, because they fall so heavily into racist tropes and are... I'm not going to use the word enthused, because I think that's false. I think they focus so heavily on these tropes, they forget to actually write something playable.
Are you getting assaulted by all of these? Sorry.
To camel back off of Adam Ali's point for a second.
Talk to the hand, I guess.
I'd like... I think there's also like another angle we've not considered that is worth also noting of like the harm something like this in general, like this specific one or a similar piece of work can bring to the table. Because being honest, most of us have been in tabletop groups, and so we know how it goes. Usually, at most half the table are going to read this book going into the game. The other half, or the majority, are going to go to the character creation, create a character, and trust the game master or the one or two knowledgeable people to bring the lore to the table. And so, when the lore has so many restrictions in it that you are not aware of, and you show up to the table, you're going to get like a game like this, and the setting, the way it's structured like this, is going to encourage you to like show up, be like, oh, I'm playing a woman character, and then someone's going to be like, you can't. Here is why, and the book supports them, right? Like, and you might be like, okay, so my character, doesn't share this one value, and the person's gonna be like, impossible. The entire world supports it, and you like as a just like in terms of like adding so many restrictions that you have to read through everything to find out about it is going to be really unfun to players, even if they weren't so racist, sexist, etc. But B, when you add that layer to it, it means you're encouraging one or two people who learn the lore and who read it to come and present that racism to the group, to then present that sexism to the group, to propagate it and to enforce it because it is the lore.
Yeah.
I to camel back off what both of you have said.
Camel back.
That was. I know. Like, because those were points I was going to bring up, both of them anyway. I think this book, in my opinion, encourages very harmful play for all the myriad of reasons we've spoken about. For example, I can imagine, for example, someone coming to the table with a female player character and being constantly restricted or having the threat of sexual violence put upon them because that's something that this book actively encourages. And it's the mindset that the book actively encourages in the players and the GM. I think this book is incredibly harmful in that way, as well as in like the general racist and sexist tropes that it perpetuates. I think it actively encourages very, very harmful ways of playing tabletop games.
And it also creates this unnecessary...
Oh,
sorry.
I meant you.
It also kind of adds this whole thing of if there's... And it usually becomes this thing that one female PC in a group of male and men PCs, that every time the woman PC shows up anywhere, suddenly it gets derailed into the rest of the party having to defend her honor, and you don't get to play at that point it's like I'm this gigantic liability, I shouldn't even play.
Yeah. I'm actually brought to mind of something people have mentioned in the comments a couple times nowadays, where this book was marketed as a fun romp with genies and magic, and what so far have we read that's actually been fun? Not even from like a racial standpoint.
I think I said this at the end of the last episode, where I'm just
the family thing.
Where at what point is this a game? Like, at what point is this a thing that you get to participate in and put your own ideas into? Because so far, all it is a list of restrictions.
Yeah, this world isn't fun.
They're incredibly sexist and racist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to throw in my thing here. I apologize, Ahmed, but my thing is, where's the fantasy? Where's the fantasy? Like, sure, you said goat hair tent. Couldn't that be some other form of fantastic creature tent? Like
A griffin feather tent.
yeah, or something like or even, just say, okay, we're going to use like it's a rock feather tent or something, right? Like sorry, I think we discussed that was not specifically Middle Eastern, right? Or no, I think anyway, but you know what I mean? Like, if that's not accurate, please do tell me about it after the stream. But where's the fantasy, right? Like, where are the fantastical creatures? So far, this just reads like a travel guide.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be kind of like, this is what the people in this country, this land are
The
like.
people are the fantastical
Ammar,
creatures.
yeah,
Exactly. That's what it's
Exactly.
painting it as.
Ammar, I don't think you're being fair here. I think when you're dealing with such like fantastical creatures like camels, is that enough?
And brown people.
I don't know about you, but I only exist in fantasy.
And servant girl entertainment.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
no, it's a
Like,
good
what
point.
part of
And
this
salt.
is a fantasy RPG? Like, it's a salt.
They don't have
Look-
salt in sci-fi.
Look, salt is a protective thing. The minute you have some, that's it. You're now you can't do anything. You got to wait 3 days before you can poison someone.
Another unnecessary restriction.
Emma, do you have sort of general thoughts on this?
Yeah, a lot of this is really unusable. There are camelbacking on the pop culture that is already well known to the people. The Arabian Nights, the movies based on these in our region, our history, they're not really doing much. They're just piggybacking or camelbacking on this concept that people are already coming with an expectation. This is related to that, so we're going to have adventures like these and the places that are mentioned in these books. So they really did just like a travel guide.
Yeah. Jeez.
A really racist travel guide.
Well,
You should
and
have camel banks instead of piggy banks,
right, yeah.
and it'll have more space too. It's like real, like you can have 2 extra spots.
Buddy, one of us is gonna have to leave now.
Well, it was
I see
nice
that
knowing
as a
you.
merch idea. Can we make that?
Camelback.
But it's for dice storage.
Ooh.
That we know everyone who. Nope, I'm gonna turn off the stream. TM, that's my idea. Because all of you are
Happening right
using
now.
Camelback, but there's a company called Camelback, and they're gonna sue us.
Camel bank. Sorry,
Yeah,
camel
we put that in the
bank.
camel bank.
Put it in the
Yeah.
bank.
Well, I was actually thinking about that, not to go on a... I was like, wait, what does piggyback mean? Like, are you riding a pig? Like, you don't ride pigs as far as I'm aware.
Have you not seen the Hobbit
like,
movies?
Horses. Yes, that documentary, The Hobbit.
There's a documentary
I almost-
on the Middle Earth and life in the Shire. Yeah.
Western culture is so
You should say you
fascinating to me.
backpacking, where you basically are someone's backpack, because that's what I think of when I think of a piggyback ride.
I'm too foreign for all these
backpacking.
concepts. Just too foreign.
I'm very confused by all of this personally, but
Yeah.
But anyway, any other sort of closing thoughts? We can.
I have a bad joke, but do I save it for before before the plugs or after the plugs?
Before the plugs, please.
Do
For-
it now.
I need my time to groan.
People
All
might
right.
turn it off after the plugs. So
Does anyone have any important things to say before I do my bad?
Go ahead.
So I've mentioned it on the stream before. I think I've referenced the Honor episode 3 times this episode. Dang. But on the Honor episode, as like our palate cleanser, I brought up Goha, the wise fool, and who is a figure in a lot of North African, Middle Eastern, that's literally just kind of all over Islamic and adjacent areas folklore of this person who is your classic like jester trope, like actually really wise but is a fool 90% of the time about it. And there's some fun stories that are just like jokes at his expense, and there's some that are like nuggets of wisdom. You can skip to the end of the Honor episode if you want to save yourself, and then just listen to those fun stories if you so wish, because I shared a couple there. But I'm going to share one more today. There's one about Goha and his camels, which I feel like is appropriate. So the story goes that he had 10 camels, and he was taking them across from one place to the next. And as he was traveling, he counted them. He had 10. So he got up on the first one, started riding, and after a while, he's like, "Let me check how many I have to make sure I haven't lost any." So he looks back and he counts 9. He pauses. He's not really sure why there's 9. He gets off the camels. He does a double count. He's like, maybe I just didn't see them right. Nope, all 10 are still there. He gets back on his camel, keeps riding, looks behind him again, sees 9.
Oh God, no.
Gets off, then gets back on, and when he's off his camel, there's 10. So he just exclaims out loud, "Huh! Every time I get off the one I'm riding, I get my 10th camel back." That was just a log set up to the camel black pun. That's all I got.
The joke, watchers, is that
It's a
the 10th
salty
camel
pun.
is what he's on.
Yeah.
No, the joke is we've said camelback a lot this
Yes.
episode.
Yeah. It's
That
a
is an actual
salty
real story that
palate
I turned
cleanser.
into my bad joke.
Oh, geez. Alrighty. Well, at that, we can go ahead into the various plugs. Please tell everybody who you are and where people can find your exciting projects. Let's start with Izza and go in initiative order.
Yeah, hello, I've been Izza. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at evilcleverdog, and I have a couple of different upcoming projects I would like to plug, so please bear with me. The first is that I have made, but have not posted anything on yet, a YouTube channel, and very soon there will be content coming onto that YouTube channel of the cosplay and costume design related variety. So please come check that out. The channel name is Evil Clever Dog, and is linked on my Twitter and everything. And then in terms of TTRPG stuff, on Monday, season 2 of Quest the Soaring City is starting over on Chromatic Chimera, which I play in. It could be a pretty good jumping on point if you haven't watched season 1, or you could go catch up on season 1 on Chromatic Chimera's YouTube channel. And then the other piece of TTRPG related news also pertains to Adam Ali, which is that me and Adam Ali are going to be in a Burn Bright stream, also on Chromatic Chimera. We think our start date is the 24th of October. We haven't quite had it confirmed yet, but it's going to be very, very soon. It's going to be GM'd by the lovely Nat, who GMs Quest the Soaring City, and our third player in our party to round us out is Draconics. So yeah, please come check that out at some point. It's going to be very, very cool and very
We
exciting.
promise it will be on a Saturday evening, and we also promise that there will be 2 robots and 1 swarm of bugs.
Yeah.
Adam Ali, please.
Hi, I'm Asians Represents Token Werewolf, Adam Ali. You can find me online at Werewolf Feels. There's only one of us, and I like it that way. No, you can find me online at Werewolf Feels, and you can find whatever projects I've been working on. I am doing more than I can legally talk about, quite literally. But I will say this. I have some podcast things that I'm coming up on. I've got some stream things I'm coming up on. But I've got one thing you're guaranteed to see every other Wednesday, next Wednesday included, and that is the Burn Bunch over on Off the Table's Twitch channel. We're an all BIMPOC, all queer group, get together, play Monster of the Week, and I am the gayest werewolf in existence. Because I have a type. On top of that, I'm always working on new things, and I'm always available for cultural consulting and some fun writing if you ever want to get into that. There's some projects coming up that I want to talk about, but I can't, but I want to. Also, I just want to say that, I'm very thankful for this platform, and I'm very thankful to you, the watcher, because I know that we sometimes get stressed out here, but all of you have been very supportive. And I want to mention that, especially after yesterday when I screamed in chat, people were very supportive, and I'm very thankful for that.
Amr?
Hey, I'm Ammar Emerez. You can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Emerez. My Twitter is sort of the central point for finding stuff. But if you enjoyed my presence here, tomorrow evening at, I believe, 7 EST on the Arvin Elrond channel, I play as part of the Sound Classic Clampdown stream, which is Brandon O'Brien's Forge in the Dark game about essentially a cyberpunk world where music is magic and is controlled by the government/corporations, and about the punk scene being used to rebel against that. It's a lot of fun. I am playing everyone's favorite sort of antagonist, the person who looks at the corrupting influence and the Cafulian portals and goes, maybe we should study those. Nothing bad could happen from doing that. So check that out if you want to watch me play a sort of potentially antagonist. Who knows where the character will go? It's a lot of fun. The crew's awesome. On Friday, you can catch me over on the Utopia channel that Mary mentioned earlier with a open podcast. The other one is also open podcast, playing Chimera, which is one of the games I'm working on designing along with my co-host. We've done 2 sessions. It's pretty easy to jump on because we haven't really jumped into the action yet. The characters are delightful. The cast is phenomenal. Everything about it is a blast. So please come check it out. It's a lot of fun. Other than that, you can also currently hear my voice on the Tabletop Potluck podcast. We're playing through Ironsworn. I am playing a giant dolphin person, basically think the Zora from Breath of the Wild, who is very pure of heart and large of muscles, and is just here to make friends and beat up anyone who gets in our way. Other than that, if you want to see some of my writing work, I'm also on the Thirsty Sword Lesbians Kickstarter that Mariam mentioned earlier. My stretch goal is the one that is currently up. I'm going to be writing a setting about super scientists, superheroes in a world that like tries to examine what superheroes look like outside of our current status quo, where the goal is not just to fight villains and throw them in jail, but rather create a society that prevents the need for supervillains to rise in the first place because everyone is accounted for, and what that sort of justice looks like. So yeah.
Well, that sounds hella cool. Definitely support that Kickstarter. That Mariam is also on, and so if you'd like to take it away.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. That's where you can find out news of anything and everything I'm doing. But the highlights are I'm the co-caretaker of Utopia, where every alternate Wednesday we run a Serzamin, which is my South Asian fantasy setting. Set in Quest called Kahania. It's an amazing group of players and amazing story that we're telling. In addition, I am the GM and creator of the Musafirs, which is currently on hiatus. We just finished casting the rest of our team, and I don't want to say anything because we're working on sort of doing formal announcements for that, but I'm very excited for that. And Ammar is also a player and part of that. In addition, I am part of the Thirsty Sword Lesbians Kickstarter, where both my stretch goals were funded. I think like in day 1 or day 2, really quickly. And my stretch goal is basically writing about South Asian folklore about serpents and magic jewels that they have, which is very South Asian thing, and also a playbook playing one of them. There's basically shapeshifters, and I'm also a part of a charity thing that's happening end of November called Fuck Cancer Roll Dice, where I will be running a game of dialect, and you can my Twitter will have all that information as well.
Fantastic. You seem to, you're very busy.
Yeah.
Everybody here seems incredibly busy. Emma, would you like to share how awesome you are and where people can find you?
Yes. To begin, I will be very, very free comparatively to everyone else here. I run a community for Arabs trying to play and engage into the D&D community. I translate, I do cultural consultation. I am very active on Twitter. You can find me at 20 Arabia RPG, which is also the name of our community. And you can hit me up anytime, ask me about anything, and you see me sharing random pictures from places around the Middle East and sometimes random long threads.
Yeah. One of the really cool things about Emma's Twitter, because I think that you were a bit modest there, is if you ever want to get away from like the standard like Western monsters that everybody knows and is kind of tired of, check out their Twitter, because you'll sometimes post like super cool Middle Eastern like creatures and stuff that you can kind of incorporate, and which is super, super amazing. Obviously, you know, as respectfully as possible, but it's great. My name's Ammar. You can find me on @AmmarJazz. I'm also linked through the Asians Represent Twitter. So if you're already following me there, you can give me a follow there. You should follow everybody here. In particular, I am a host of Asians Represent, so you can catch me speaking on the podcast. I'm also also a part of this live stream, of course. You can find previous episodes of this as well as this episode at our YouTube channel. You can just search for Asians Represent, and it sort of pops up into the critical read thing. I'm also a cast member in Dungeons and Asians, and we are moving towards making that a live stream as well. So you can jump online, follow us on Twitter, and we'll post about when the next one is. Join us live, which will be really, really exciting because we've only ever done that A, as audio, and B, asynchronously. So looking forward to making that happen too. I also want to throw a big shout out for Daniel Kwan, who has been patiently joining us and doing all the producing and making all of the tech magic work so we can focus on working through this text. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Ammar, Dungeons and Agents has already been live a couple of times.
Whoops. It's already been live a couple of times. Sorry.
I knew that.
Out of it today. And so, yeah, the other thing I wanted to plug is quickly, if you want to catch our appearance at, so Daniel Kwan, Ahmed, myself, and I believe there were a couple of other people too, who, was there anybody else?
It was Steve and Pam, who are
Steve and
also
Pam.
both admins of our Discord server, as well as, Steve and I did our Oriental Adventures stream.
Yep. Fantastic. You can also catch the replay of that stream when we did a panel on weaving Asian stories. So if you want to get a sense of what it might be like to start from scratch, so to speak, without kind of putting aside this legacy material, you can have a look at that too. That's on the Dungeons and Dragons channel. So you can
put that in the chat.
Thank you.
One other thing, if I know Izzo, you're in the UK. If you're a UK listener or a watcher, Dungeons and Asians is actually in the new D&D annual that's being published this year. You can pre-order it at amazon.co.uk. It comes out at the end of the month. We are the first all-Asian actual play with Asian characters to be featured there.
Hell yeah.
In a D&D publication, so that's pretty sweet.
That's awesome.
Yeah. We're sort of trying to, create our own space in that, and elbowing our way through the crowd a little bit as we need to. You can join us the next month. We are going to be doing these Al-Qadim streams on the third Saturday of the month at 12 Eastern Daylight Time. So please tune in next time and take care of yourselves.
That should be the 21st of
November.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.